What do you do when you have a stakeholder that's important but just doesn't respond to any of your emails? Welcome to the Art of Stakeholder Management. Today, our panel has faced this exact challenge and many more, and they're here to share with you their success stories and their battle scars. I'm Lauren, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined by Parul, Adam, and Reed. We're a mix of new friends and old friends, and we're going to have some fun and keep it real together for the next half hour. So let's go ahead and jump right in. As Catherine mentioned, Parul is a director of product management at Indeed. And I want to start by asking her, who are some of the most important stakeholders that you have to manage?
So, Lauren, when I think about my stakeholders, I ask myself, are they someone who can derail my plans? Who can impact my plans? Can they impact my roadmap? Can they change what am I building? How am I building it? When am I building? And if the answer is yes, they are my stakeholder. And depending on the context I'm operating in, it could be a small group. Usually it ends up being a large group, right? For example, at PayPal, it was usually a pretty large group. It would include my leadership. It would include sales team that would have input in my roadmap. It would include ops team, who was usually advocating for automation. That's something my team had to build. It would include product and engineering teams across the organization whose help I would need to build the product. So really the core is, who is it? Whose help do I need? Can they have a material impact on what I'm trying to do? So that's how I try to define my stakeholders, try to figure out who they are and build these relationships with them early on. So that's easy for me when the time comes, I need something from them, I can approach them.
Great. Yeah, that's a really helpful way to think about defining who your stakeholders are. And I'm curious, Reed is a user researcher at Zoox, whether your set of stakeholders are similar or different than the ones that Parul just talked about.
I definitely think that there's things that are in common. One thing that I think can be interesting to maybe add to it, because I think it was really hit on the nose of like who can derail. I think that's such a good perspective of who is a stakeholder. Sometimes previously I have thought about it is maybe the degree that they can do that. Like, is this a problem that they're also likely to derail? The example I was once given is the plant next to the desk. The CEO probably doesn't have a strong opinion on. Could come in and, like when a CEO says something, it's a fire for everyone, but like often it may not be something that they're too strong in. I think the other thing I kind of think about is sometimes my biggest stakeholders are also my partner's biggest stakeholders. So when I'm kind of thinking about it, like for me, my operations team is one of my largest kind of stakeholders and kind of primary clients that I think of. So sometimes that is a common kind of point that we have together. But there's going to be people all over. There's going to be the engineer I'm immediately working with. And in some ways, the way they can derail it is either build or not build what I want, as well as end of the call, kind of the highest paid person in the room that was being talked about. Like sometimes that's the one we all kind of think about. So yeah, I think it was spot on. And I just think of like, to some degree, what's the relationship to that person, to the problem? Because that's probably going to influence the likelihood that they're going to impact it, and how close do they need to be to the problem.
I love how you referenced the hippo problem that was in the last panel. I think we probably all faced it before, and that's a fun one. So Adam is in the healthcare space. Curious how your set of stakeholders might be a little bit different, given you have a healthcare dimension as well as a B2B side.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I think there's a lot of resonances with the other panelists, but sort of in the healthcare space, particularly, I work at Mayo Clinic Laboratories, which is a large reference laboratory. So our clients are other hospital systems. So we think a lot about the internal stakeholders that I completely have the same experiences as Reed and Parul, but then external stakeholders are pretty diverse for us. And in the B2B space, that can make life challenging and exciting for research. And so, there's certainly, physicians, lab testing. So there's managers of labs, specimen operators. So if every lab test will touch 15, 20 people before it gets to us, and then before we do the work ourselves, and sort of it moves over to our sort of internal stakeholders. So having an appreciation for those sort of external touch points is really key to our work. And I would be remiss if we didn't point out that the patient is always the primary stakeholder in healthcare. And so that person, even when you're running in highly complex processes, we do a lot at Mayo Clinic to always center the patient from a lab test to every single interaction we have.
I love that you mentioned how the patient is really the most important user, most important stakeholder that you deal with. And I think in consumer tech, a lot of times that's the end user. We all kind of share similar prioritization, if you will, of our stakeholders. Does anybody have any different ways that they think about how to prioritize their stakeholders?
I can jump in. I think it changes depending on what's going on with my product. If I am trying to, build something significant in the beginning, I focus on my leadership to get their buy-in. I focus on other groups who will be instrumental in me building this. But over time, for example, if there are teams that I know will be against this idea, right, they might become my focal point. So at any given time, I try to assess where is it that I can expect pushback from? Where can I see an opposing opinion, which might take time, which might take bandwidth, and I make that my focus. So for me, it usually changes over time as I work on my product.
Yeah, you have to be very agile with your stakeholder management as you go through your agile product development process. So I think that makes a lot of sense as you are kind of juggling that and preparing for maybe some difficult conversations when you have stakeholders that don't agree with your perspective. How do you prepare for those kinds of discussions? Anyone can take it. I think Reed, in our prep session, you had an example.
I think I definitely don't do this every time that I go into a meeting or something, but maybe it's because I understand what's at stake, or maybe it's just the diverse points of view that I might be kind of beginning to work with. But I do think about it's valuable to kind of think through the different ramifications of different options that you might have. It's very much, if you think of it like negotiation, which I'm sure many people at the conference have taken negotiation courses, is one of the big things about like at least modern negotiation is it's not about like a competitive like head-to-head battle. It's a lot more about thinking about, I think in two ways, is both thinking about the what's at stake, what does everybody want and need out of the situation, and at the same time kind of balancing with that, like if you can't get something to work, or if there is something that won't budge, what are the next options? And I think when you're really working in a collaborative space, we have the benefit of being able to work through the thing that won't budge. Maybe we have a partner that has a lot at stake, and you can't necessarily really ask them if they're scared or they're fearful, but you can begin to talk to them about their concerns about like how it might reflect on the team or on them as an individual, and say, okay, like, well, let's play this out. If we go with that option, what happens? And if we go with these other options, and just kind of work with them to kind of play out the options. I think that can be a good way to kind of like persuade people, is let them see all the information on the table.
Negotiation as a preparation technique. I love that. And I love that you think about, win-win. And if not, because it's not always possible, then what is the next best option? I think that's a really key takeaway there. So Adam, since you have internal and external stakeholders, does what Reid outlined work with the type of stakeholders that you deal with? Are you able to kind of use that negotiation type framework as well? Or what kind of preparation goes into your discussions?
Yeah, one of the things that's probably distinctive for sort of our group's work as opposed to some folks at the conference is how much of a challenge it is for us to get to an external stakeholder. I loved one of the previous presentations that emphasized connecting with a user at least once a week, and I think we probably get that on average. But the amount of sort of prior authorizations and relationships and pre-meetings it takes to get there is pretty significant for us. So for us, our field staff or our sales team is always the primary holder of the relationship with our clients. And we work with our communications team to help support at any time we reach out to clients, and also have follow-up meetings with our field staff as well. And so we do that because we so value our clients' time, and they sort of really respect how we interact with them. But it does mean that sort of each one of those interactions with those external stakeholders takes on a sort of an additional level of import, and you want to use that time absolutely as absolutely well as you can, and so you should really value it. And yeah, so I'll stop there. And just in terms of some of the things we think through, at the end of the day, I think for all of us, it's about relationships, right? And it's the reasons we have all those steps is because we value the relationship with that client or that external stakeholder, and so much so that we want to really be careful and orchestrate that experience.
Right. You want every interaction with that user, that stakeholder, to be positive and add to the relationship. Adam, thanks for that. I think our timing was great because we got a question from Lee, which asked about how you manage communication when you're disconnected from stakeholders who aren't part of your company. So I think we've addressed that one. And we also got a question from Sydney, who asks about when you're not actually making the decision. So I think that would be a great question for Reid, who I know as a user researcher, you're frequently in the position where you're advocating for the user, but you don't own the decision. So what have you found is the best way to advocate for the user?
I think it is about starting with relationships. I think that, like, when possible, like sometimes you get these things into the point that sometimes you're just not in a position, you're not able to, but like if you're able to build a lot of relationships in advance, it's super helpful, because then you have a common ground that you can kind of meet on. But other times, I think it is trying to understand both what's important to the person that maybe you're trying to influence or trying to manage the relationship with, understand kind of what's important to them, and then also think about different times that things have been effective. Maybe there's things that they've shared during a all hands, or maybe there's something where in different meetings you've been in, something that's kind of like affected them, or like you've seen that kind of response. You can look at those ways of approaching the problem, and maybe it is the actual kind of storytelling or the kind of painting the picture, trying to show them audio and video and really trying to make it come alive for them. And then if they're a quantitative person, trying to like bring that live experience and then maybe connect it to some data as well, and try to find that balance. I think also when you can bring them into the experience, like make them do it. Like if it's something that is unpleasant, set up your meeting where you actually have someone go through the workflow at the beginning of the meeting to kind of introduce it and anticipate the problems that they're going to have, or maybe set it up that they're going to run into some problems that can naturally occur. So like just bringing it to them in a way that is real and that they can connect with, that is palpable to them, I think is an approach that I like to take when possible.
Yeah, and Lauren, sorry, I want to just add to what Reid was saying. And times when I am not in the decision, I'm not the decision maker, but I have a stake in what the decision is. There are two things that I've done, and actually that align along the lines of what Reed was saying. Number one is just making sure that I align on the goal, right? Explicitly mention that this is what we are trying to do. And the second thing is if I am able to demonstrate that I understand their concerns, that I have explored the other options, they're like, I know their world well. I think that also goes a long way in building my credibility and also in my recommendation being taken seriously, right? Then they are more comfortable relying on what I am saying if I'm able to demonstrate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of good stuff you guys mentioned there, putting yourself into your stakeholders' shoes, using a mix of storytelling, data, whichever way speaks to the stakeholder more. And I would add like one more approach, check out Reed's on-demand talk on using frameworks and user research to bring people in along the way in the process. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I opened up the panel with a question of what do you do when you have an important stakeholder who just does not respond to any of your emails? And, you know, it was a little bit of a selfish question because this is a problem that I've dealt with before as well. I had an important stakeholder on the legal team who I needed to review a contract, and every single time we had a meeting set up, she would cancel or not show up at the last minute or blow past deadlines. And I know, Parul, you had a really great story along those lines as well. So I'd love for you to share it with this group.
Yeah, so I have been in this situation multiple times, right? Where I'm working with somebody, I need them to weigh in, and for some reason they're not engaged, right? And, you know, I have sent them emails and meetings and I haven't gotten a response. And I have made the same mistake, you know, more than once, which is, okay, well, they don't have the time. This is not a priority for them. So let me just move forward without their blessing. And there are times, usually I do this when I know what they have to say is going to make my life more difficult, right? It will just create more work for the team. So I did that. You know, the last time I did that, there was kind of a challenging stakeholder that I had a history with, and I knew that she wasn't aligned, and so, but she wasn't engaged, and I said, okay, let's just move ahead. And obviously, before we had to launch, we still had to get her approval, and at that point, she brought up all of the concerns that I was worried about, and just because she hadn't attended the meetings or she hadn't given this feedback earlier, in her mind, didn't really make her feedback any less important, which is fair, right? Your concern is still your concern. And at that point, it was, the stakes were much higher. We had promised our customers that we will be delivering this product by this timeline. And to adjust would have been a much bigger deal had I chosen to address her concerns earlier on. And so at that point, it became an escalation, and then we had to address it. But the big lesson that I learned was that, you know, if there is conflict, go through it rather than around it. Because as painful as it is, if there is this saying, a stitch on time saves 9. That's exactly the case. If you go through the conflict, if you deal with it now, you will make your future a lot more peaceful, a lot more smoother, the journey. So yeah, I have done that mistake a few times, and now I finally get it. Choose the harder path.
Yeah, I think you've actually given some talks on managing conflicts as well. So I think you have taken that learning.
Yeah.
Adam, I want to ask, you know, since you have the internal and external stakeholders, how do you get ahead of this like buy-in problem when it's, you know, hard to have some of those direct conversations, especially with customers? It's highly orchestrated. How do you do your best to ensure that there's alignment before you just walk into a big meeting and get blindsided by critical feedback?
Yeah, so before COVID, when we were all actually in the office, one of the best ways that we found is just sort of those informal contact points you could have in the office, you know, stopping by somebody's office and just framing up, hey, there's a meeting coming up on Friday. You know, this is what we're expecting. I really would love your feedback on this. area particularly, or I know this is a value to you, and sort of highlighting it that way. And I have found sort of now we're in a work from anywhere environment that those opportunities have evaporated, and they're just more difficult to have those for serendipitous moments of connection that actually do drive progress forward for projects. And so one of the things that I've found is my schedule is much busier because I'm having those 10, 15 minute check-ins with folks. And I am finding I need to schedule them. And it's usually it's basically taking the place of what would have happened prior. And part of that is because a lot of our organizational culture strives on relationships, but also sort of giving everybody a voice and coming to consensus. And so sometimes it's the meeting before the meeting that helps that consensus come about. And unfortunately, it takes time, and it's not the straightest line. It's towards a solution always, but given where we are and given the work circumstances, it's the appropriate act in a lot of cases, sort of at this moment at least.
I also think to kind of add to it, like when people, I think we've all probably had the experience where people come to us for advice because they want to move into the field. And one of the things that I often do is I talk to people about like, quote, networking, like going to events and stuff like that. I encourage them to go, but I encourage them to go and not try to network, but try to make genuine friendships. Like if you can actually make genuine friendships, the other stuff will kind of come. So I think just to kind of like add to what Adam was saying, I do think that there's huge value in trying to like in our working environments to try to establish those like really genuine connections and friendships with people, because then like generally you want to work to kind of solve the problems with people that you're friends with and that you enjoy working with, even if you have different points of view, even if like you're very firm in the ground of like you don't think something is the right way to go, you'll feel so much more willing to kind of like work through with someone that you feel like you're that connection with. I'll leave it there, but I just think like genuinely try to build the friendships. The other things will come as you do that.
Case in point, Reed and I actually worked together. We were stakeholders of each other in product and user research, and it's true, we didn't always agree on everything, on all the findings from the studies that we did, but we worked through it and we still talk to each other. We're friends. We have another question from the audience. This is from Gary, and it seems to be directed to Reed. How do you communicate new scope, blue sky user research that is damning to project stakeholders who seemingly only care about budget and timelines?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think so. I actually have it's kind of like that significant stakeholder story that kind of goes with that. Is I was previously somewhere where I was asked to take on like a kind of a nebulous space of they wanted to increase efficiencies, but they had a lot of like ambiguous tools that they were using, and the people of a certain level stopped understanding how to do the work to get it done. So I had a very clear ask. There was actually aspects of it, like to look into some tooling that I didn't even know about until executives asked me to take a look at that and understand what we could do. And I did, and I went through, and what came out of it was not only some like very practical, immediate findings that we could put into play. There was also basically a blueprint for a new tool set that we could kind of argue, or like kind of like start working towards. And one of the comments that I got back from the person that told me to go look at this stuff, I really ended up, when I collaborated with the team and said, okay, here's the blueprint, and our conclusion at the time was actually we shouldn't move forward with this yet. The time that it'll take to engineer and build this, there's not enough gain at this time. We're not scaling at a rate where it's going to be as relevant. So the comment from the exec was like, then why did you even do the research? And I think at first, like, it was really a stab in the heart. I was like, because you told me to. This was your ask. But I think instead of saying that, because that would not have been a full comment at all, I think what I had to do is begin to understand, is like help them understand the mitigation that it's helping us. I think one of the hardest thing for a researcher sometimes to accept is like sometimes if you're doing good research, it shouldn't always come out with a product. Sometimes you actually might recommend that like this is not a productive direction to go, and you may kind of like maybe you put a project to sleep, especially when it's blue sky or foundational. Sometimes you put stuff to sleep and you actually say it's not the time. We can archive it, we can save it, we can reference it. There's tons of learnings, but this is not the way we should go forward. So I think if you can kind of like understand what are the benefits when you're doing research, there's no loss or there's no lack of value that's being generated, but it may not be, you may have to take a different chunk and say, yep, we didn't get to do that. The thing we were asked to do, I'm recommending us not to do that, or it looks really bad and that's the problem. And then like, look at the value that you do have. Do you have a new direction that you can go in? Do you have engineering time that you're going to save because you're not going to invest in this? I think that's how you need to kind of put it forward, because I'm sure there's value you've derived if you look close enough.
Yeah, I think it's super important to clarify the things that should be deprioritized. A lot of times when you think about even like managing your own to-do list, it's important to draw out things that are not important from your to-do list. Otherwise, you won't get to the things that are really important. So we have time for about one more question, and I'd like, just maybe a quick answer from each of you guys about how your stakeholder management style has changed over your career or over the course of the pandemic. How have you adapted your style over time? Adam, you're the first box to my right, so maybe you can start with this one.
Sure. So I think 2 years ago, I would have said, it's about I wanted to put it this way exactly, but empire building. So sort of we're the voice of the clients, always come to us whenever you're asking any sort of question that has some client feedback mechanism. And I've really switched over the years and really appreciated how the whole organization has an incredibly client-centered culture. And that's how we've been successful. And then really acknowledging and appreciating and lifting up when other teams are showing that client-centered mindset. And so really trying to affirm, hey, my team's the client experience team, but you are doing this work already. Fantastic. Let's tell that story. And because it's not about sort of me or my team, it's about sort of centering the client as we work towards business value.
Thanks, Adam. How about Parul next?
Yeah, so what I have learned over time is building relationships, influencing somebody takes time. And that's not something I knew going into to these kind of conversations early on. I used to over-index on, I am meeting with them. I need them to say yes to this. And I used to go in with a lot of pressure on myself. And I think that kind of came through, almost like I'm pushing them to say yes to something. And I realized it's not one conversation. It's a series of conversations over time, how you influence people, how you really get to know them and they get to know you. And I think that has really helped. I have taken that pressure off myself. Like, even if it's not a yes in the first meeting, I'm like, okay, for now it's not a yes, but I can try to change it over the next few meetings. So just know that no meeting is as important as you might think it is. There are always other chances to do that.
Very wise, Parul. And let's wrap it with Reed and any final thoughts that you have on how your style has changed over time.
Yeah, I would say, like, I really echo what has already been stated. It's been said best. And I think what I would add is what's probably happening for me is in parallel, there is the development of my discipline. Early on, I might argue with a stakeholder of how many people we should have in a research project. They want 10. I don't think we need that many. And like, it's a back and forth. I evolved to the point of saying, okay, if I think we only need 5 for this particular like round of research, but they want 7, let's do 7. Like that extra time is not worth kind of like battling over. And now I'm at the point where I'm comfortable enough with the research that I do that I'm less concerned about that. And I'm more thinking about like, are we learning? Are we gaining the value out of the work that we're doing? Because I have the confidence that I can do the research and I can do my best to mitigate my bias, and I can try to get enough to kind of get a broad view. I'm less concerned about how many people, and now I'm more thinking about, are we learning? So I think as I've matured as a researcher or in my discipline, for people that are not researchers, it's been in parallel with that kind of maturing of like, how do I manage my stakeholders?
Thank you so much, Reed, Adam, and Parul, and thank you everyone for joining us in this panel. If you take one thing away from this panel today, I think we've said it multiple times: invest in building relationships with your stakeholder. It will pay off in the long run. And don't be afraid to build your skill over time, to adjust your skill and learn from your mistakes. So I wish all of you the best in building your stakeholder management skills, and thanks for joining us.